The day my parents threw me out, they didn't even use a suitcase. They used trash bags. I can still hear the sound of the plastic stretching as my mother shoved my clothes inside, like she couldn't get rid of me fast enough. It wasn't loud, but somehow it felt louder than anything I'd ever heard in my life. That sound stayed with me longer than her words. And her words were cruel enough. "You made your choice," she said, not even looking at me. "So don't expect us to keep sacrificing for you." I remember standing there, frozen, trying to understand what choice she was talking about. I was 13 years old. The only thing I had done was refuse to give up my scholarship, a full STEM scholarship I had worked for, earned, fought for just so my older sister Tiffany could go to some expensive art camp for the summer. That was it. That was my crime. Behind her, Tiffany stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, staring at the floor, like she had suddenly developed a deep interest in the tiles. She didn't say a word. Not one. And somehow, that silence hurt more than anything my parents said that day. My father dropped another bag at my feet. "Take your things and go cool off somewhere. Maybe when you learn how to put family first, we'll talk." But the way he said it, it wasn't temporary. It wasn't discipline. It was dismissal. I picked up one of the bags, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold on to it. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded, how desperate. My mother finally looked at me then, but there was nothing in her eyes. No hesitation, no guilt. "That's not our problem anymore." And just like that, the door closed in my face. Not slammed, not dramatic, just closed. Quietly, permanently. I stood there on the front porch, holding 2 black trash bags filled with everything I owned, staring at a door that used to mean safety. I kept thinking, any second now, it's going to open again. This is a mistake. Someone's going to realize they went too far. But minutes passed. Then more. The sun started to dip lower, and the porch light flickered on above me like it was welcoming someone else home. Not me. That was the moment it hit me. I didn't have a home anymore. If you're listening to this right now, I want you to pause for just a second and imagine being 13, sitting outside your own house, and realizing you don't belong there anymore. Because I didn't just lose a place to sleep that night, I lost the idea that I was wanted. I sat there for over an hour. I didn't cry at first. I think I was in shock. My brain just refused to catch up with what was happening. Cars passed by. Neighbors walked their dogs. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked questions. And honestly, I don't blame them. From the outside, it probably just looked like a kid sitting on a porch. But inside, everything had already started breaking. Then, a car pulled up. At first, I didn't even look. I figured it was just another neighbor. But when the engine turned off and the door opened, something made me glance up. And that's when I saw him. Uncle Harold? I hadn't seen him in years. He lived in Seattle. He wasn't close with my parents, actually. Now that I think about it, they barely ever spoke about him. But there he was, standing in front of me, taking in the scene, the bags, the closed door, me sitting there like I didn't know where to go. His expression changed in a way I didn't fully understand back then, but I recognize now. It was anger, mixed with something deeper, something protective. "They actually did it," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I swallowed hard. "Did what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked up the steps, picked up one of the trash bags, and weighed it in his hand like it told him everything he needed to know. "Come on," he said finally, his voice steady but firm. "You're not staying here." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go, but because part of me was still waiting for that door to open behind me. It didn't. Where am I going?" I asked. He looked at me then. Really looked at me, and for the first time that entire day, I didn't feel invisible. "You're coming with me," he said. "And from now on, you don't have to wonder where you belong." I didn't realize it in that moment, but that sentence would change the entire course of my life. I stood up slowly, grabbed the rest of my bags, and followed him to the car. I didn't look back when I got in. Not because I was strong, but because I was afraid if I did, I wouldn't be able to leave. The drive was quiet at first. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, just full of things that haven't been said yet. After a while, he spoke. "You hungry?" It was such a simple question, normal, ordinary. But it hit me so hard I almost cried right there. "Yeah," I whispered. We stopped at a diner on the way out of town. I remember the smell of fries, the clinking of plates, the hum of conversation around us. It felt like stepping into another world, one where life just kept going, like nothing had happened. I ate like I hadn't eaten in days. Maybe I hadn't. I don't really remember. At some point, he leaned back in his seat and said, "You don't owe anyone your future, not even your parents." I looked up at him, confused. "But they said I was selfish." He shook his head. "No, they said that because you didn't do what they wanted." That was the first time someone had ever said it like that. The first time I even considered that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the problem. That night, we kept driving. Out of the city. Out of everything I had ever known. And into a life I never saw coming. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. I know this isn't an easy story to hear. It wasn't easy to live either. But what happened next, what my uncle did, what my family tried to do later, it's something I still struggle to put into words. Because the truth is, getting thrown out was just the beginning. What came after? That's where the real story starts. If you're feeling something right now, anger, sadness, maybe even recognition, stay with me. And if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, I'd really like to hear your story too. The first night at my Uncle Harold's house, I didn't sleep. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, it was actually the softest thing I had ever laid on, but because my body didn't know what safety felt like yet. Every little sound made me tense up. The hum of the heater, the creak of the floorboards. Even the silence felt unfamiliar, like it was waiting for something bad to happen. At some point around 3 a.m., I got up and walked to the doorway, just to make sure I was still there, that it hadn't all been some strange dream, and I'd wake up back on that porch. I wasn't. The hallway light was on, dim and steady. And at the end of it, I could see a shadow moving. My uncle was still awake. He was sitting at the kitchen table, reading through a stack of papers, glasses low on his nose, a cup of coffee beside him that had long gone cold. He looked up when he heard me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, even to Maine. Even though I wasn't. "Yeah, I just couldn't sleep." He studied me for a second, like he knew that wasn't the full truth, but he didn't push. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from him. "Come sit." I did. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he slid a plate toward me, toast and scrambled eggs. "You didn't eat much earlier," he said. I stared at the food. I wasn't even sure I was hungry, but something about the gesture, it made my chest tighten. "Thank you," I whispered. That became our rhythm, in a way. He didn't overwhelm me with questions, didn't try to force conversations I wasn't ready to have. He just showed up. Consistently, quietly, in ways that slowly started to matter more than words. The next few weeks were a blur of adjustments. New school, new city, new life. Seattle felt different from everything I'd known before. The air was colder, sharper. The sky seemed to carry more weight. And I carried my own weight too, everywhere I went. I kept expecting someone to realize I didn't belong, that I was temporary, that at any moment, I could be sent away again. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I worked. I studied harder than anyone else in my class. I stayed late, asked questions, took on extra assignments. Not because I loved it, but because I was terrified of losing this second chance. Every A felt like proof that I deserved to stay. Every mistake felt like a warning that I didn't. And even though my uncle never once said anything to make me feel that way, the fear was already rooted deep inside me. One afternoon, about 3 months after I moved in, I came home later than usual. I had stayed after school to redo a math test I had gotten a 92 on. A symbiondida. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, reworking every single problem until it was perfect. When I walked in, my uncle was in the living room, watching the news. "You're late," he said, glancing at the clock. "I had to fix something," I replied, dropping my bag by the door. "What needed fixing?" "My test. I didn't get everything right." He muted the TV and looked at me. Not confused. Not impressed. Just concerned. What did you get? You sure are. There was a pause. Then he leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. And that wasn't good enough? I shook my head. It could have been better. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he gestured for me to sit down across from him. Listen carefully, he said, his tone calm but firm. You don't have to be perfect to stay here. Something about the way he said it, it hit a place in me I didn't even know how to defend. I know, I said quickly, even though I didn't believe it. No, he replied. You don't. And just like that, the room went quiet. Because he was right. I didn't know. I had never known a version of love that wasn't conditional. That wasn't tied to performance. That didn't come with invisible rules. So even when someone offered me something different, I didn't know how to trust it. Over time, though, things began to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, in small, almost unnoticeable ways. I stopped checking the door every night to make sure it wasn't locked from the outside. I started leaving my books on the table instead of packing everything away like I might have to leave suddenly. I even laughed. Sometimes. Real laughter. The kind that surprises you. And through all of it, my uncle remained the same. Steady. Predictable. Safe. Years passed. High school turned into college. I got into a top university with a focus on finance. The same scholarship that once got me thrown out became the foundation of everything I was building. My uncle came to every milestone. Graduation. Internship presentations. Even small things, like my first academic award ceremony. He never made a big deal out of it. Never gave long speeches. But he was always there. And somehow, that meant everything. During my sophomore year of college, he invited me to visit his office. Up until that point, I knew he worked in real estate, but I didn't fully understand the scale of it. That day changed that. The building itself was impressive. Glass exterior, modern design, the kind of place that made you stand a little straighter when you walked in. People greeted him with respect. Not forced, not performative. Real respect. I watched him move through the space with quiet authority, and for the first time, I realized. He wasn't just successful. He was respected. Come, he said, leading me into his office. We sat down, and he handed me a folder. Inside were financial reports, projections, investment summaries. I want you to look through these, he said. I blinked. Me? You're studying finance, aren't you? I mean, yes, but then start thinking like it matters. I spent the next hour going through everything, my mind racing, trying to keep up. When I finally looked up, he was watching me. Well, he asked. I hesitated, then pointed to one section. This property, the returns don't match the projected growth. It looks like it's being overvalued. He didn't react immediately. Then, slowly, he smiled. Good, he said. That was the moment everything shifted again. Because for the first time, I wasn't just the girl he took in. I was someone he believed in. From that day forward, I started spending more time at the office. Learning, observing, asking questions. And little by little, earning my place. 15 years later, I became chief financial officer of that same company. A company valued at over $23 million. On paper, it looked like a success story. From abandoned child to executive. From nothing to everything. But life doesn't work like a clean narrative. Because just when I thought the hardest part of my story was behind me, the past came back. Not quietly, not gently, but in a way that would force every secret, every truth, into the open. And this time, I wasn't a 13-year-old girl on a porch anymore. If you're still here with me, thank you. I know this is a long journey, and we're just getting to the part where everything starts to unravel. In the next part, you'll meet the people who once called themselves my family, and you'll see exactly why some wounds don't just heal with time. If this story is stirring something in you, don't keep it to yourself. I read every comment, every story you share. Sometimes, the strongest thing we can do is speak. For years, my old life stayed exactly where it belonged behind me. No calls. No message. No apologies. At first, I used to check my phone more than I'd like to admit. Birthdays, holidays, random days when something reminded me of them. I don't even know what I was hoping for. Maybe a "how are you?" Maybe some kind of acknowledgement that I had existed to them at all. But nothing ever came. And eventually, I stopped looking. It wasn't some powerful, dramatic decision. It was quieter than that. More like, something inside me just got tired of waiting. So I built a life where I didn't need them. I graduated. I worked. I earned my place. I became someone who didn't have to beg to be seen. And for a long time, that was enough. Until the phone rang. It was a random Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office, halfway through reviewing a set of quarterly projections, when my assistant buzzed me. "You have a call on line 2, she said. They didn't leave a name, but they said it's family. That word. It shouldn't have meant anything anymore, but it did. It always did. I stared at the phone for a few seconds longer than I should have, then I picked it up. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Diana?" My grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this?" Another pause. Longer this time. "It's Mom." I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't recognize her voice, but because I did. And hearing it again, after everything, felt like opening a door I had spent years trying to seal shut. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone flat, controlled. Straight to the point. Because we both knew this wasn't a casual check-in. There was a soft exhale on the other end. "That's no way to talk to your mother." There it was. Not "I'm sorry," not "I miss you." Just expectation. I almost laughed. "You lost the right to that title a long time ago," I said quietly. Silence. Then she shifted, like she was adjusting her strategy. "We heard about you," she continued. "About your job. Your success." Of course you did, I thought. Because people like them always hear about success. They just never show up for the struggle. "I'm busy," I said. "Say what you need to say." Another pause. Then finally, the truth started to slip through. "Your uncle," she said carefully. "We heard he's not doing well." My heart drawer, but my voice didn't change. "He's fine," I replied. It wasn't a lie at the time, but something about the way she said it made me uneasy. "We'd like to come visit," she added quickly. "It's been a long time. We should reconnect." Reconnect. The word sounded almost ridiculous coming from her. "You don't get to just show up after 15 years and pretend we're a family again," I said. "We are family," she snapped, the edge in her voice finally breaking through. "Nothing changes that." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city below. "Everything changes that," I said. And then I hung up. My hands were shaking. Not because I was weak, but because some wounds don't disappear, they just go quiet. And that phone call? It woke everything back up. Over the next few days, I tried to push it out of my mind. I buried myself in work. Meetings, reports, numbers. Numbers were safe, predictable. They made sense. People didn't, but something felt off. That call, it wasn't just about reconnecting. I knew that. There was something else, and I didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. A week later, my uncle collapsed. It happened in the office. One minute he was walking out of a meeting, the next, he was on the floor. I got the call while I was across town. I don't even remember the drive to the hospital. All I remember is walking into that room and seeing him lying there, still, quiet, machines doing what his body couldn't. For a moment, I was 13 again. Helpless, terrified, about to lose the only person who had ever chosen me. I sat beside him, holding his hand, trying to steady my breathing. "You don't get to leave," I whispered. "Not yet. Not like this." The doctors said it was serious. Heart complications. Stress. Years of pushing too hard. They stabilized him, but the warning was clear. Things were going to change. And just like that, everything I had built, everything that felt steady, started to feel fragile. That night, I stayed at the hospital. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, counting each breath like it mattered. Because it did. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it, then answered, "Hello?" This time, it wasn't my mother. It was a man. "Am I speaking with Diana Myers?" "Yes. My name is Victor Harrington. I represent your parents." "Of course you do. I'm not interested," I said immediately. "I think you will be," he replied smoothly. "This concerns your uncle's estate." And just like that, the pieces clicked into place. They knew. They knew he was sick. They knew there was money. And they were already moving. "What exactly are you implying?" I asked, my voice colder now. "I'm saying," he continued, calm and calculated, "that there may be questions regarding your influence over your uncle's financial decisions." I felt something shift inside me. Not fear. Not sadness. Something sharper. "You're accusing me of manipulation?" I said. "I'm suggesting," he corrected, "that these matters are best resolved privately." There it was. Not concern. Not family. Control. They wanted control. And they thought they could intimidate me into giving it to them. I looked over at my uncle, lying there, fighting for his life. And something in me hardened. "You tell them this," I said slowly. "If they want something from me, they can come say it to my face." I hung up before he could respond. That was the moment I knew. They weren't back because they cared. They were back because they thought I was weak. Because they thought I would fold. Because somewhere in their minds, I was still that 13-year-old girl sitting on a porch with nowhere to go. But they were wrong. And in the next few weeks, they were going to find out just how wrong they were. If you're still here, you can probably feel it too. That shift. That moment when a story stops being about survival and starts becoming about truth. In the next part, everything escalates. Legal threats, confrontations, and a discovery that even I wasn't prepared for. Because what my parents did years ago, it wasn't just cruel, it was legal, and it was permanent. If this is hitting close to home for you, don't stay silent. Your voice matters more than you think. Share what you feel, share what you've lived. Because stories like this, they're more common than people admit. The room didn't move after that, not really, even though people shifted in their seats, even though papers were still on the table and the lights hummed quietly above us, everything felt suspended, like the truth had settled into the space and refused to leave, and I could see it on their faces, that slow, uncomfortable realization that there was no way to talk around what had just been put in front of them. My mother kept staring at the document like, if she looked long enough, she might find a mistake, some technical flaw, some small detail that would give her something to hold on to. But there was nothing there except her own signature, her own decision, preserved in a way that couldn't be softened or reinterpreted. My father leaned back slightly, his jaw tight, his eyes no longer on me but on the table, on anything that didn't force him to confront what this actually meant. Because for the first time, this wasn't about memory, it wasn't about perspective, it was about record, about something that existed outside of their version of events. Tiffany still hadn't touched the document, but her eyes moved between all of us, taking everything in, and there was something different in her expression now, something more aware, like she was seeing the situation not as it had been told to her over the years, but as it actually was. Victor was the first to recover, not emotionally, but professionally, because people like him don't react, they adjust. He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands again, his voice measured, controlled, but not as confident as it had been when this meeting started. "This document," he said carefully, "addresses guardianship, but it does not automatically eliminate all potential claims regarding the estate, particularly if there are concerns about the decedent's state of mind at the time of more recent decisions." He chose his words precisely, creating space where there wasn't much left, trying to shift the focus forward instead of backward. But even as he spoke, I could hear it, the difference, the lack of certainty, the way he was testing the ground, instead of standing firmly on it. Margaret didn't rush to respond, and that was something I had started to notice about her. She didn't react out of pressure, she moved when it mattered, and when she did speak, it carried weight. She closed the folder gently, her fingers resting on top of it for a moment, before she looked directly at Victor. "Mr. Myers' state of mind has been thoroughly documented over the years," she said calmly, "including independent evaluations, financial oversight records, and legal reviews. There is no evidence to support any claim of diminished capacity. Her tone didn't rise, it didn't sharpen, but it didn't leave room for interpretation either. And more importantly, she added, this document establishes a clear and intentional transfer of parental authority, at a time when your clients were fully competent and aware of their actions. My mother shook her head again, more forcefully this time, like she needed to physically reject what was being said. We didn't understand what we were signing, she insisted, her voice rising just enough to break the controlled atmosphere of the room. We were told it was temporary, that it was just to help with schooling, with stability. We were under pressure. We trusted Harold. Her words came faster now, less structured, less controlled. And I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about defending herself legally. This was about protecting the version of herself she had been holding on to all these years, the one where she hadn't done something irreversible. Margaret met her gaze without hesitation. The document was reviewed, explained, and notarized, she said. You were given the opportunity to ask questions, to seek independent counsel, to reconsider. You chose to proceed. There was no accusation in her voice, no judgment, just fact, and sometimes facts land harder than anything else because they don't allow for emotional escape. My father finally spoke again, his tone lower now, more controlled, but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. We were trying to do what was best at the time, he said. You don't know the full situation. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a second I almost recognized something familiar, not warmth, not regret, but something like justification that had been repeated so many times it had become truth to him. No, I said quietly. I know exactly what the situation was. I was there. That stopped him. Not completely, but enough, because there's a difference between arguing a position and being confronted by someone who lived through it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had been avoided for years, and I could feel it pressing in again, but this time it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt grounding, like everything was finally aligned in a way that didn't require me to question my own memory, my own experience. Margaret turned slightly toward me then, not to speak, but just to acknowledge, and that small gesture mattered more than I expected, because it wasn't about support, it was about recognition. Victor cleared his throat, shifting again, recalibrating. Even if we accept the validity of this document, he said, there are still broader considerations regarding inheritance rights, particularly given the familial relationship. He was reaching now, not carelessly, but deliberately, searching for any angle that might reopen the conversation. Margaret responded just as deliberately. Familial relationship, she repeated, her tone neutral, is not a sufficient basis for inheritance when legal guardianship and parental rights have been formally relinquished and transferred. The estate's structure reflects that reality. She paused for a moment, letting that settle before continuing. And any further claims would require substantial evidence to overcome the documentation already in place. That was the moment I saw it clearly, not just in what was being said, but in what wasn't, the shift from confidence to effort, from assumption to strategy. And it confirmed something I had already started to feel. This wasn't going to end quickly, not because they had a strong case, but because they weren't ready to accept that they didn't. My mother leaned back in her chair, her hands now resting in her lap instead of on the table, and for a brief second, she looked tired, not defeated, not apologetic, just tired, like the weight of holding on to something for so long was finally starting to show. I didn't feel what I thought I would feel in that moment. There was no surge of vindication, no sense of winning, just a quiet understanding that this wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about standing in something that was already true. So what happens now? My father asked, his voice steadier again, but lacking the certainty it had carried earlier. Margaret answered without hesitation. Now, she said, we proceed according to the terms of the estate, and any further action you wish to take will need to follow the appropriate legal channels. Victor nodded slightly, already processing that, already thinking ahead, because for him, this wasn't personal, it was procedural, but for the rest of us, it was something else entirely. My mother looked at me again then, and this time there was something different in her expression, not revision, not control, but something more uncertain, like she was seeing me not as the version she had held onto, but as I actually was now, and I didn't look away. Not because I wanted something from that moment, but because I no longer needed to avoid it. No one spoke for a few seconds, and in that space, I realized something that felt both simple and significant. This was the line. The point where everything that had been built on assumption and memory and control had collided with something solid, something that couldn't be reshaped, and from here on, whatever happened next would be different, not because of what they chose to do, but because of what was no longer possible to deny. If you're still here with me, you can probably feel that shift too, that moment where the story stops being about what happened in the past and starts becoming about what comes next, because what you've just seen, what just came into the light, it wasn't the end of anything, it was the beginning of something much bigger. And in the next part, you're going to see exactly how far this goes, how prepared my uncle really was, and why this document, as final as it seemed, was only the first layer of a truth that had been carefully protected for years. Stay with me, because what comes next doesn't just challenge them, it changes everything. I thought the document would end it, that once the truth was laid out in black and white, once their signatures were sitting right there in front of them, there would be nothing left to argue about. But I underestimated something important. People who are used to controlling the narrative don't let go easily, even when the truth is staring them in the face. My mother set the document down slowly, like if she moved carefully enough, it might somehow lose its meaning, like it wasn't real unless she reacted to it, and then she looked up at me, not with guilt, not with regret, but with something sharper, something defensive. "You're twisting this," she said, her voice tighter now. "We were trying to do what was best for you." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how familiar it sounded, that same tone, that same justification, the same way they had always reshaped reality to fit their choices. "Best for me?" I repeated quietly, leaning forward slightly. "You signed a document giving me away." My father stepped in quickly, like he needed to regain control of the room. "We didn't give you away, we made a temporary arrangement," Harold insisted. "You were out of control back then." That one hit differently, not because it hurt, but because it was so disconnected from the truth that it almost felt like they were talking about a different person. I looked at Margaret, and she didn't say anything right away. She just reached into her folder again, calm, precise, like someone who already knew exactly how this was going to unfold. "Actually," she said, sliding another document across the table, "Mr. Myers anticipated this conversation." That caught everyone's attention. Even Victor's posture shifted slightly. Because now this wasn't just about what had happened, it was about what had been prepared. "What is that?" Victor asked, his tone more cautious now. Margaret didn't rush. She opened the document, turned it so it faced them, and said, "This is a recorded statement from Harold Myers, dated 2 years after the guardianship transfer." I felt my chest tighten without warning, because I hadn't known about this. I hadn't known he had done that, and suddenly, it felt like he was in the room with us again. "A recording?" my mother asked, her voice wavering just slightly for the first time. Margaret nodded, then pressed a small button on a device she had placed on the table. The room filled with a voice I knew better than my own thoughts. Steady, calm, certain. "If you're hearing this," my uncle's voice said, "then it means there's a dispute, and if there's a dispute, it means Diana is being questioned." I couldn't breathe for a second. I just sat there, listening, holding on to every word like it mattered more than anything else in that moment. "Let me make something clear," his voice continued. "No one influenced me. No one manipulated me. Every decision I made regarding my estate was deliberate, considered, and entirely my own." Victor shifted in his seat, but didn't interrupt. "Diana didn't take anything from me," my uncle said. "I gave it to her because she earned my trust, my respect, and my name." My mother shook her head slightly, like she could somehow reject what she was hearing just by refusing to accept it. "This doesn't prove anything," she said quickly, but her voice didn't carry the same confidence anymore. The recording continued. "Her parents," he said, and there was a pause there, just long enough to carry weight, "chose to walk away from her, legally and emotionally. And they don't get to come back later and rewrite that decision when it becomes inconvenient." The silence in the room after that was suffocating. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the truth had settled into every corner and refused to leave. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not even pain, something closer to clarity, like for the first time, everything I had lived through was being acknowledged, not just by me, but by someone who had seen it all from the outside. Margaret turned off the recording gently, like she understood the weight of what had just been said. Mr. Myers ensured that his intentions could not be misrepresented, she said calmly. Victor finally spoke again, but there was a different tone now, less control, more calculation. Intentions can still be challenged under certain circumstances. Margaret met his gaze without hesitation. Not when they are this clearly documented. My father leaned forward, frustration starting to show through the cracks. So that's it? We're just supposed to accept that she gets everything? I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see authority. I didn't see someone I needed approval from. I saw someone who had made a choice a long time ago, and was now facing the consequences of it. It was never yours to begin with, I said quietly. That landed harder than anything else I could have said, because it wasn't emotional, it wasn't reactive, it was just the truth. My mother's expression shifted again, but this time it wasn't anger, it was something closer to desperation. We can fix this, she said quickly, turning toward me now, her voice softer, almost pleading. We can move forward, as a family. There it was, the shift I had been expecting, the moment where the strategy changed, where control turned into persuasion, where they tried to rebuild something they had already destroyed. I held her gaze, steady, unmoving. We were a family, I said, until you decided we weren't. And just like that, there was nothing left for them to stand on. If you've stayed with me this far, you can probably feel it. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about truth, about choices, about the things people do when they think no one will ever hold them accountable. And in the next part, everything reaches its peak, because the will hasn't even been read yet, and what's inside it is something none of them are prepared for. If this story is hitting something real for you, don't keep it inside. Share your thoughts, your experiences, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone. Stay with me, because part 6 is where everything finally breaks open. The day of the will reading didn't feel real, not at first, because there's something strange about sitting in a quiet, polished room, knowing that everything is about to change, not just financially, but emotionally, permanently, in ways you can't take back once the words are spoken. I remember walking into that room with a kind of calm I didn't trust, like my mind had decided to protect me by keeping everything at a distance, but the moment I saw them sitting there again, my parents, Tiffany, and Victor, that calm started to crack. They looked different this time, not defensive, not cautious, but expectant, like people who believed they were about to win something. That was the part that unsettled me the most, not their presence, but their confidence. It meant they still believed the outcome would somehow favor them. Margaret was already there, organized as always, documents laid out with precision, every detail prepared, every possibility accounted for, and when she looked at me, she gave a small nod, not dramatic, not reassuring in an obvious way, but enough to ground me. This wasn't chaos, this was structure, and structure meant truth had somewhere to stand. We all took our seats, the same long table, the same cold lighting, but this time the air felt heavier, like everyone in the room was holding their breath without realizing it. Margaret began without delay, her voice steady, professional, carrying just enough authority to keep everything in place. We are here to formally read the last will and testament of Harold Myers, she said. And just hearing his name spoken like that made something tighten in my chest again, because this was real. He was really gone. And this was the part where his voice would exist only through what he left behind. She continued with the formalities, legal language, confirmations, all the things that make something final, and I could feel my mother shifting slightly in her seat, impatient, like she was waiting for the part that mattered to her. And then we got there. Before the distribution of assets, Margaret said, there are specific statements Mr. Myers requested to be read in full. That caught their attention immediately. I could see it in the way my father leaned forward, in the way Victor adjusted his posture again, because statements meant context, and context could change everything. Margaret opened the document and began reading. To those present, she read, I want it clearly understood that my decisions are not accidental, nor are they influenced by pressure, obligation, or expectation. Her voice didn't change, but the weight of the words did. Every action I have taken reflects my understanding of loyalty, responsibility, and truth. I glanced at my parents, and for the first time, I saw something flicker there, not confidence, not control, something closer to uncertainty. Margaret continued. There are individuals in this room who believe they are entitled to what I have built, not because of their actions, but because of their titles. My mother's expression tightened immediately. Let me be clear, Margaret read, her voice unwavering. A title means nothing without the behavior to support it. The silence in the room became almost unbearable, because now it wasn't just legal, it was personal, directly, intentionally personal. Then came the part that shifted everything. Richard, Margaret read, and my father froze, just slightly, but enough to notice. You owe this estate $80,000, a debt you chose to ignore despite multiple opportunities to resolve it. My father's face changed instantly, the color draining just enough to betray him. This amount will be deducted from any claim you believe you have. That's not, he started, but Victor placed a hand on his arm, stopping him before he could finish. Margaret didn't pause. Sandra, she continued, and my mother's back straightened. You signed a document relinquishing your parental rights to Diana. That was not a temporary decision. That was a permanent one. My mother shook her head, whispering something under her breath, but it didn't matter, the words were already in the air. You do not get to reclaim a role you legally and emotionally abandoned, Margaret read. And just like that, whatever illusion they had been holding on to started to collapse, not loudly, not dramatically, but piece by piece, right in front of everyone. I sat there, completely still, because this wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. This was my uncle speaking for me, defending me, even after he was gone, and that realization hit deeper than anything else. Then Margaret turned the page. Now, she said, we proceed to the final clause. The room felt like it shrank at that moment, like everything was narrowing down to a single point. In 2012, she read, I formally adopted Diana Myers as my daughter. No one moved. No one spoke. For a second, I thought I had misheard, because even though I knew what he meant to me, even though I knew what I meant to him, hearing it stated like that, legally, officially, it was something else entirely. From that point forward, Margaret continued, she is, in every legal and personal sense, my child, and my sole heir. My mother's composure shattered first. That's impossible, she said, her voice rising. You can't just replace. He already did, I said quietly, before I even realized I was speaking, and that was the truth they couldn't escape. Not because of the money, not because of the legal structure, but because of what it represented. Choice. He chose me, completely, without hesitation. Margaret finished the clause. All remaining assets, holdings, and controlling interests are to be transferred to Diana Myers. And that was it. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Final. Absolute. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was the sound of everything they had expected slipping away from them in real time. I looked at my parents, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I was waiting for their approval or afraid of their rejection. I just felt done. If you're still here with me, you can probably feel it too. This is the moment where everything changes, not just for them, but for me. Because what comes next isn't about fighting anymore, it's about what I choose to do with everything that's been placed in my hands. And in the next part, you're going to see something they never expected, not anger, not revenge, but a decision that defines who I became after all of this. If this story has stirred something in you, stay with me, because part 7 is where the emotional truth finally rises above everything else. The quiet didn't rush out of the room after they left. It stayed, settling into the chairs, the table, the space between breaths, and I let it, because for so long, silence had meant something was wrong, something unspoken, something waiting to explode. But this silence felt different. It felt earned, like the kind of stillness that comes after something has finally been said the way it needed to be said. I didn't move right away. I just sat there, my hands resting lightly on the table, noticing how steady they were now, noticing how my body wasn't bracing for impact anymore, and that realization alone felt unfamiliar enough to sit with a little longer. For years, I had measured safety by how prepared I was for something to go wrong, how quickly I could react, how well I could anticipate disappointment, but sitting there in that moment, I realized I wasn't anticipating anything. I wasn't waiting. I was just there. And that presence, that simple ability to exist without tension, it felt like something I had been missing without even knowing it. Margaret gathered her documents slowly, not in a hurry, not trying to fill the silence, just allowing it to exist. And there was something about that restraint that I appreciated, because too often people rush to close moments like that, to soften them, to move past them, but she understood that some moments need space, they need to settle into you before you can step out of them. "You handled that well," she said after a while, her voice gentle but certain. And I thought about that for a second, because I wasn't sure well was the word I would have chosen. It didn't feel like handling something. It felt more like letting something finally be what it was. "I didn't do anything," I replied quietly, and she gave a small, knowing nod. "Sometimes that's exactly what needs to be done," she said. And I understood what she meant, because for so long I had been doing, proving, reacting, adjusting, and this was the first time I had simply stood still in my truth without trying to shape it into something more acceptable. When I finally stood up, it wasn't with hesitation, it wasn't with relief either. It was something in between, something steady, like stepping out of a version of my life that no longer fit, and into one that had been forming quietly in the background all along. The hallway outside felt brighter than I remembered, or maybe it was just that I was seeing it differently, and as I walked through it, I noticed how my steps felt grounded, not rushed, not uncertain, just deliberate. Like I was no longer trying to get somewhere else, I was exactly where I needed to be. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio, I didn't reach for my phone, I just let the quiet stay with me, and that's when the memories started to come, not in sharp, painful flashes, but in softer pieces, moments layered over each other. The porch, the trash bags, the cold air that night, the sound of the door closing, and then, just as clearly, the car pulling up, my uncle stepping out, the way he didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate, just acted, just chose me without needing to explain why. That contrast, that distance between those two moments, it hit me in a way it never had before, not because it hurt, but because I could finally see it for what it was. Not as something I needed to fix or understand, but as something that had shaped me and then passed. By the time I got home, the sun was starting to set, the light coming through the windows in that soft, quiet way that makes everything feel a little more still, and I stood there for a moment in the doorway, not because I didn't want to go in, but because I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to feel before. This place, this life, it was mine, not borrowed, not temporary, not something that could be taken away with a decision I didn't make. I stepped inside, set my keys down, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to check anything. Not the doors, not the rooms, not the past. I walked into the living room and sat down, letting the weight of the day move through me without trying to push it away. And that's when it shifted again, not into sadness, not into anger, but into something quieter, something that felt like release. Like all the questions I had carried for years, all the why, and what if, and maybe if I had done something differently, they just didn't matter anymore. Not because I had answers, but because I didn't need them. I thought about my mother's face, the way it changed when she realized there was nothing left to hold on to, no version of the story she could reshape, and I expected to feel something about that, some kind of satisfaction or closure, but I didn't. Because the truth is, her realization didn't change what had already happened. It didn't give me back anything that had been taken. It just confirmed what I had already learned to live with. And in a strange way, that made it easier to let go, because I wasn't waiting for her to understand anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything from her at all. Tiffany's words stayed with me a little longer, not because they erased anything, but because they were real, and real things have weight, even when they don't fix the past. I understood her in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before, not as someone who had hurt me, but as someone who had been there and didn't know how to act, and that understanding didn't open a door, but it softened something, just enough to leave space for something different in the future, something that didn't have to be defined by what had happened back then. As the evening settled in, I found myself thinking about my uncle, not in that sharp, painful way that comes with loss, but in a steadier way, like his presence hadn't left, it had just changed form, moved into the choices I made, the way I carried myself, the way I approached the life he had helped me build. He had known, I realized that more clearly now than ever, he had known this moment would come, had prepared for it, not just legally, but emotionally, making sure that when it happened, I wouldn't be standing there alone, questioning myself, doubting what was true. And that was the moment it fully settled in, not as a thought, but as something deeper, something that didn't need words. I wasn't alone anymore, not in the way I had been at 13, not in the way that made everything feel uncertain and fragile. I had something solid now, something that didn't depend on anyone else's choices. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a back, letting that realization sink in completely, because it wasn't just about what had happened that day. It was about everything that came before it, and everything that would come after. It was about the fact that I had made it through something that was never supposed to break me, but almost did. And I had come out of it not hardened, not closed off, but clearer, more certain of who I was, and what I would allow in my life moving forward. If you've stayed with me through this part, you probably feel it too, that shift, that quiet moment where something inside you decides it doesn't need to keep fighting anymore, that it's okay to stop holding on to what was, and start stepping into what is. And that's where the real change begins, not in the loud moments, not in the confrontations, but in the quiet decisions you make afterward. And what I did next, what I chose to build from that place, it didn't come from anger, it didn't come from proving anyone wrong. It came from something much simpler, something much more important. It came from understanding exactly what it means to be given a second chance, and deciding not to waste it.